Hey, and welcome to today's talk. My name's Nathan Neighbor. I'm our lead pastor here at Humanity Church, and you may notice things are a little different. Unfortunately, on Sunday, our live stream cut out right when I got up to speak, and so we lost the entire talk, but we wanted to bring you this conversation anyways, because we are in the middle of a conversation called Rebuild, where we're taking a look at specific areas in our lives that are in ruin and rebuilding them. We're not talking about theories of how to rebuild, but we're actually looking at those areas in our lives that we long to have something new take place in. So even as we jump into this conversation, my invitation to you is to take a look at that specific area of your life that you are committed to have something new in, that you are committed to rebuilding. And we've been taking a look at the life of this man named Nehemiah. The Israelites had found themselves in exile, meaning they had been taken over by a nation, and Nehemiah was now the cupbearer to the king of an entire different people group. And the first thing that happens in this rebuilding story is Nehemiah's friend comes and visits him, and Nehemiah asks him, I need to know the status of the wall in Jerusalem. In other words, hey, tell me, how bad is it? Tell me what's going on. And so the first step that we talked about in rebuilding, it may seem obvious, but the first step is being willing to recognize, being willing to look and say, hey, I want to see where things aren't working. I want to see where things are in ruin. I want to see where things are falling apart. And many of us avoid that like the plague, or we keep things really general. I know oftentimes in my own life, people will ask me about an area that feels like it's in ruin, whether it's in my health or with my finances or with my relationship. And I'll usually say something like, it's bad. I don't know if you've ever done that before. So many people use that. When we're talking about those areas that are in ruin, oftentimes we use that it's bad phase. And I'll ask people, well, how bad is it? Oh, it's really bad. And it's not until we get into the specifics of like, hey, what's actually happening in your health? What's actually happening in your finances? What's actually happening in your marriage? What's actually happening in your spiritual life? That we get into the brass tacks of like, how much are you in debt? Or how much weight have you gained? Or what was the diagnosis? Or man, what is the status of the marriage? That we get into it. So the first step in rebuilding is our willingness to recognize where we're at. And then a few weeks ago, Marla talked with us about what it looks like to make a request and get the resources necessary to start rebuilding. So many of us have not because we ask not. And half the battle is just getting to a place of courage where we're willing to ask, hey, can I have what's necessary to make this change? So many of us are just afraid to ask for what we need for because it puts us in a vulnerable place. And Nehemiah, he goes to the king and says, hey, I need time off. And then the king gives him the resources. Had he never asked, had he never made the request, he would have never found himself here. And then last week we talked about after we recognize and after we make the request and we get the resources necessary, then comes the resistance, because hate is going to hate, right? So there's external resistance when we upset the system that we're in. Other people are going to say, who are you to rebuild? Who are you to change the system? Who are you to mess up what we have? But then there's this internal resistance that comes along with it, where we start doubting ourselves, like, am I the person that's supposed to do this? Is this actually what God's called me to do? Is this even possible? And what we do with the resistance determines what's next in our lives. It determines whether we rebuild or whether we just go back to stasis. And so what do we do now? What do we do now that we've recognized what's needed to be rebuilt? We've gotten the resources and we've made the requests necessary to rebuild. We've actually pushed through the resistance, and the wall is now built. That's where we find ourselves. So turn with me to Nehemiah chapter 7, starting in verse 1, and this is what it says. After the wall had been built, and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers, the musicians, and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanai, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most people do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, have them shut the doors and bar them. Also appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their houses. Now, I don't know about you, but it would have been super easy if I was Nehemiah to look at the walls and say, they're rebuilt. My job here is done. I came here to rebuild the walls. I'm good. I'm going to go back to tasting wine with the king. I don't need any more of this mess. And that's such an easy place to be. Now, most people never actually even get to that place where their life is rebuilt, where those walls that were in ruin in their lives are actually put back together, where that area that was once not as it was designed to be is now back functioning whole. But here's the thing. When we get to that place, it can actually be a very dangerous place to be. because this is where we start assuming my job here is done and this is all there is. See, this is the equivalent of saying, yay, I got out of debt. This is the equivalent of saying, yay, I no longer have high cholesterol. This is the equivalent of saying, well, we aren't fighting anymore in our marriage. This is the equivalent of saying, well, my kids don't hate me. This is the equivalent of saying, well, I'm now praying every now and then, or I'm reading my scriptures, or I'm engaging differently with the world around me. And it's easy to get to that point where things are like functional again and say, hey, it's working. Why would I need to go any further? And it's even easy to say, hey, I've put in the hard work. Now is my time to rest, to kick back, and to enjoy life. And this is actually where we become the most vulnerable, because Nehemiah in this moment allows his vision to move beyond just reconstructing the walls. He moves into this space of what's next. He moves into the reconstruction phase of the culture and the city and the people in front of him. See, had he stopped here, look, he would have changed the trajectory of a nation. The walls were up. The city was put back together. He would have probably gone down in the history books as the man who rebuilt the wall. But no, he says, great, the walls are rebuilt. Now we need gatekeepers. We need people to secure the city. Not only do we need gatekeepers, but we need musicians. We need people who are going to come and are going to worship with us. And then he says we need Levites. In other words, we need spiritual leaders who are going to come and invest in the city here so that this is a space where people can thrive, where commerce can happen, where life can happen, where worship can happen, where people can transform their spiritual journeys. And Nehemiah dreams of the city that he longs to live in, not just for himself, but his entire nation, that he longed to have this city of thriving security, of worship, of spiritual development. Now, there is a world of difference between saying to yourselves, yay, I got out of debt, and now I'm thriving financially. What does it look like to be generous? There's a world of difference between saying, hey, I no longer have high cholesterol, and what does it look like to step into optimal health so that my body is like a gift to other people? There's a world of difference between saying, well, we're no longer fighting anymore, and now there's like intimacy and vulnerability and trust in the relationship. There's a world of difference between saying, like, my kids don't hate me anymore, and saying, man, we are building a vision for our family that is going to transform the world around us. There's a world of difference between saying, man, I'm no longer spiritually dead, and saying, what does it look like to be spiritually abundantly alive, more than I could ever ask or imagine. See, one vision is based on getting out of a despairing place. The other is a vision based on how do I move to this new holy destination. Whenever I coach people, it's like 9 times out of 10 when I'll ask them, hey, what do you want coaching on? And what they'll give me initially is all the things they don't want. They'll say, well, here's all the places where I'm struggling. Here's all the things that are falling apart. Here's the things that haven't worked. I don't want that. And so it'll sound like, I'm trying to get out of the stress. I'm trying to get out of the busyness. I'm trying to get out of this like life that feels like an obligation. And here's the thing. There's nothing to coach. You can't coach someone into not doing something or into not having this life. When there's an invitation to step into this new future, so often we respond with, hey, here's all the things that aren't working. I love how David puts it like this in Psalm chapter 40, starting in verse 1. It says, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me up out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. See, here's the thing. God's greatest longing for your life is not just to get you out of the pit. It's not just to get you out of that slimy, grimy place of dysfunction in your life. But see, often he gets us out of that space and we just stand at the pit and marvel that we're out of it. Like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. I'm out of the pit. I've been in there for years or months or days, and now I'm finally free from the pit over here. But the problem is we just stand there and marvel at it, and then we start creating excuses as to what we can or can't do based on us being in the pit. Well, I would have a healthy marriage, but, I'm the person who was in the pit. I would have thriving relationships, but, I spent so many years in the pit. I would put my finances together, get my health together, but, I was in the pit. That's who I am. And it becomes an identity statement. Or we start saying, isn't it good enough that I got out of the pit? Why are you expecting more of me? I mean, look at me. My life is nowhere near where it used to be. Isn't that good enough? And so we settle for simply getting out of the pit, and we never step into the next thing that God has for us. I love working with our 12-step community. Recovery communities are so inspiring to me. In fact, last weekend I was in Knoxville working with an incredible 12-step recovery organization. But here's the one problem that I have with 12-step communities. I remember just last weekend I was having a conversation with someone, and she came up to me and she said, man, I'm 25 years sober. And there's something fascinating that happens in the 12-step programs, because usually everyone starts with saying, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I am an alcoholic, or I'm recovering from. And this woman, I said, hey, when was the last time you took a drink? And she said, 24 years ago. And I said, yeah, you're actually not recovering anymore. You've recovered. You're actually no longer an alcoholic. You are now free from that, and you've stepped into like a whole nother lifestyle for you and your family. At what point do you get to drop the label of alcoholic or needing to be in recovery? And at what point do you get to say, hey, I'm actually a new individual? See, God is saying, I'm actually interested in putting your life on a rock, on a firm place. I'm more interested in putting a new song in your mouth and you thriving than you simply getting out of the pit. See, because the new song and the firm place that God has for you actually has nothing to do with the pit. It has nothing to do with that. But how many of us have made the pit our identity? Either we're in the pit or I'm the one who got out of the pit. How many of us are willing to lay that aside and say, now I'm the person who stands on the rock. Now I'm the person who has a new song in my mouth. That becomes our new identity. Because if your identity is, I am the person who got out of the pit, or even I am the person who God got out of the pit, then living on a firm foundation will always seem like a pipe dream. However, if your identity is I am the one connected to the God who not only moves people out of the pit, but sets people's feet on a rock, then that rock and that new song actually becomes your obvious inheritance. Because the God of the universe who loves you, who wants to do more than just move you out of the pit, is now working alongside of you, moving you into the abundance that he has available for you in this. And see, Nehemiah, he did not just settle for the walls not being in ruin. He wasn't saying, great, the walls are no longer in ruin, we can stop there. He immediately went into reconstructing the city that he longed for. Now, some of you say, Nathan, I'm just not there. My life is still in ruins. This area is still broken. The walls are still down. Great. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Start dreaming and praying and connecting to God beyond just rebuilding the walls. Start thinking about what life is going to look like on the other side when it's thriving. Allow your imagination, allow your vision, allow your discernment to go far beyond just how do I repair this area, but how do I move my life to a space of thriving and health and beauty in the middle of all of this. See, Nehemiah goes on to say this in chapter 7. Now the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. So my God put it in my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. These are the people of the province who came up from the captivity of the exiles, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylon, had taken captive. And they returned to Jerusalem and Judea, each one to his own town. Now, here's the thing that I found. Most of our rebuilding starts with a focus on our own lives. Something's not working. It's uncomfortable. It's now getting in the way. It's no longer suiting us. And so we start with saying, I'm rebuilding for me. Let's be honest, just most of us are naturally self-focused. Most of us, it's our human default. We're born naturally focused on us, my needs, getting mine. It's why we have to teach kids things like sharing, and why we have to teach kids things like, hey, there's more than just you out there. You're not the center of the universe. It's because our human default is to focus on us. And look, there's nothing wrong with that starting space. There's nothing wrong with that. Or if you're anything like me, when you think about bringing other people in, you think, oh my gosh, this is going to get exponentially more problematic. This is going to be more work for me to bring others into this conversation, others into this space. It's much easier if I just do this by myself. How many of you have ever had like projects where you think, please just you stay in your lane and let me stay in mine and we'll get it done? Because the second you add another human being into the mix, things get crazy, things get messy. It's much more efficient and we can get things done a lot faster. And Nehemiah could have easily looked around the city as he looked around and he said, man, the houses are empty. There's not a lot of people here. the walls rebuilt. People don't know about this. I don't know about you, but I would have been like, great, let's build a resort here and let's put a pool in and I will enjoy the new city that I have just rebuilt. But that is not where he went to. He looked at all of the space and all of the opportunities, and he does not say, hey, I can just kick back and worship in peace. He knew that his rebuilding was not just for him. He knew that his rebuilding the wall was actually for other people. See, he looked at this whole nation and he realized that when the walls were rebuilt, people could finally return to their homes. And this whole time, this is what he had in mind. He was thinking about that child that was going to have a place to sleep at night. He was thinking about that family that had the opportunity to get their business back together. He thought about all of the people who would now have an identity back in the city that they did not have before he chose to rebuild in this. And then there's this whole section after he declares this of people that return to the city, hundreds and thousands of people that come back to Jerusalem and make it home. See, a critical part of our reconstruction journey, our rebuilding journey, is recognizing that our rebuilding is not just for us. You rebuilding that area in your life is not just for you. And let me just tell you, this is a critical leap, and it's a leap that most people never make in their lives. I mean, let me just read for you Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 1. This is what the scriptures say. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. See, it's one thing to rebuild your life so that you can live your best life now, and you can certainly do that. It will create a certain type of fuel and a certain type of future, but the scriptures invite us to expand why we're rebuilding, why we're reconstructing in the middle of this. See, it moves us from just getting out of the rubble, and creating walls around us, to asking the question, how do I create something worth living for? How do I create a future that is so beautiful and so big and so God-sized that it actually moves beyond just me and my own comfort? It moves beyond my own need to have things the way I want them. And the moment that you shift that, that is the moment that you get the momentum of God along with you. I remember I was working with a friend years ago whose husband was struggling with addiction, had multiple affairs, and they were working on getting their marriage back. And she came to me and she just said, you know what, Nathan, he's just going to have to do this for himself. And I thought for a moment and I said, actually, no, because doing things for himself is actually what got him there. Living for himself and what was comfortable and what was easy for him and what made his life good is actually what led him to those decisions where he would betray his wife and his family. I actually said, look, the shift that needs to make is he needs to start changing for you. He actually needs to think about you and the kids, and not just that, but the future that the two of you have for your community. The second he shifts from this is all about me to, oh my goodness, there's so many more people out there, everything will shift in the middle of that. I remember I struggled for years with my weight and my health. And I tried all kinds of things, and most of it was just so that I could look better and feel better, to be honest. Everything was just, man, I don't like the way I look. I don't like the way I feel. I should change. And nothing really worked. It wasn't until my first son, Jackson, was born that I thought, this is no longer going to work for me. I have to find a solution. I have to figure this out. And it was then that I immediately figured out ways to get the weight off of me, to eat in a new way, to transform my relationship to food, because it was no longer about me. It was about him and my family and the future that we were creating together. So the reality is that your rebuilding will either open up futures or close down futures for other people. There are other people dangling on the other side of you rebuilding. So getting your health together impacts more than just you. Getting your finances together impacts more than just you. Getting your marriage or your kids together impacts more than just you. Getting your relationships healthy and your life moving forward impacts more than just you. Getting your faith and your spiritual journey on a healthy trajectory impacts more than just you, because you are made in the image of God and you are connected to a network of other human beings out there that are dangling on the other side of your life. It impacts more than just you. There are real people on the other side of your rebuilding that will either be blessed or will never experience that blessing as a result of you being willing to step into that. Now, here's the thing. The culture around you will work overtime to tell you that you just need to focus on yourself. In fact, the culture around you will tell you it's crazy for you just to keep focusing on everyone else, that you just need to hunker down, focus on you, focus on your needs, and that is actually what you need. But the reality is that when you are motivated by you, by just what you get out of it, you will run out of steam, you will be exhausted, you will be burnt out because you were actually made for something so much bigger. You will find yourself in scarcity and it will become such a lonely place when your whole life becomes about living your life, your best life now. Jesus invites us into this much larger conversation. In fact, this is what I love about Jesus, is that Jesus, God in human form, steps into human history, and he had every right to say, bow down to me. He had every right to come in power and build temples and build monuments to himself, and everyone needs to worship, they need to give, they need to sacrifice for me. But this is what the scriptures say right after that passage about considering others higher than ourselves. It says this in Philippians 2:5. It says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in the very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. Being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. See, rather than coming as the God who says, you need to worship me, you need to give to me, you need to sacrifice me, you know how he comes? He comes as a servant. That the cross was this powerful demonstration of this God of power, the God of the universe, the God who created everything, saying, you know what? I'm going to come to serve you. I will literally put myself on a cross so that your future can be expanded, so that you are no longer stuck in your own sin and darkness and brokenness and destruction. He had no need to do that. And yet in that moment, he was looking at us and saying, how can I give back to us? If that's the God that we serve, how much more so should we as individuals look out at life and say, how do I get to serve others in my rebuilding? In my reconstructing the walls that have been broken down in my life. Now, here's the beautiful thing. When you do this alone, it will be exhausting. If you try to do this on your own, by yourself, you will be tired. You won't feel like it's impossible, because it is. You will actually never be able to fully reconstruct if you do this on your own. You will find yourself resentful towards other people and tired. Here's what I love about Nehemiah, is he invites other people in. Not only did he invite other people to help him rebuild the walls, but he invites other people into this space saying, great, now that the walls are rebuilt, let's go grab people. Let's go invite people back in. Let's make sure that the city is full and thriving. We have gatekeepers and worshipers, and we have spiritual leaders in the city. Now go get people and call them back in so that this can be a space where they call home. See, at some point, rebuilding went from Nehemiah deciding to rebuild the wall to a community rebuilding a nation that would go on to be one of the most beautiful demonstrations of God in the world. See, that's how you know you've moved from divine rebuilding to simply living your best life now. When it includes more than just you. When your focus is not just on what's in it for me and how do I get what I need, but when your focus becomes, man, my life was meant to be poured out like a gift. It was meant to be given to other people. And how do I move towards that space? And as you allow Jesus to expand your vision for rebuilding, as you allow him to move you to that place where your life is given away, I know for many people, including myself, the thought process is well, my life's going to be stretched too thin. Like I have so much going on right now, I can't even fathom thinking about anyone else. But here's how the economy of God is so counterintuitive to how we think with our own minds. See, Jesus actually says, as you give your life away, you will be given more. As you pour out into other people, he will pour out into you. See, when you decide that your life's going to be given away, expanded, as you reconstruct the walls, not just for you, but for others, your life will actually grow in its capacity. He will not leave you without the resources necessary. He's not going to ask you to step into something that's going to leave you exhausted and depleted and burned out. On the opposite, the moment that your life starts moving from focusing on you and your needs and your best life now to what does this look like to give my life away, He will pour out into you everything you need, not just to survive, but to thrive in the midst of that. And your legacy will expand with that. I love that we're like great-grandkids and great-great-great-grandkids of Nehemiah's that will look back at him and said, man, he didn't just rebuild the walls and go back to tasting wine with the king. That he invited a nation back and he created a space that was so powerful that it could sustain generations of people connecting to the God that loved them. So as you step into this week, my question for you is not just what are you rebuilding for you, but what does it look like to expand beyond, hey, I got out of the pit? What does it look like to expand beyond just, hey, I'm no longer in dysfunction? What does it look like to say, I'm standing on a rock, there's a new song in my mouth, and allow that to become your identity? And also, what does it look like for you to expand that vision to include other people? Even right now, I'd love for you to just think of the name of one or two people who will be directly impacted by you reconstructing and rebuilding that area of your life. And allow that to move you and guide you. Pray for them, engage them, and allow God to expand what you see possible. Hey, can't wait for next week's conversation. Thanks for listening.